Hello? Okay, I guess it's working. All right, welcome back to Eduyot, chapter 2. We are moving on, and we're going to get actually a little bit of a connection from our discussion of last week into the beginning of this chapter. Remember, as I said at the outset, Eduyot is kind of like a random collection-ish of different teachings and different topics, but this one will get a little bit of a connection, not a whole lot. So before we get into to chapter 2, we have to do just a quick reminder about the ideas of ritual purity, of tumah, right? With ritual purity, there are different degrees of ritual impurity, different levels of ritual impurity. You have something that is av, which is like a generative, that's probably, it's the thing that actually makes other things ritually impure. But when it makes something else ritually impure, usually, it makes it a little bit less ritually impure, and then that makes other things less and less, and then it can go all the way down to level 4, but it's a little more complicated than that. And as we go into the topic, you understand that something that is lower usually has less power to influence something else, right? So the thing that is at the top, like a dead body, that will make everything else ritually impure. Something that is touched by a dead body has a chance to make something else ritually impure, but not as much as the dead body itself, right? So it loses its contamination.
Yeah, that is like radiation. The core is there.
Right.
As you are closer to the core, you are more dirty, and as you are far from the core.
Right. So, I mean, again, I hate to use... that's where she sits during the lunch and learn.
Okay.
Yeah, it's makom kavua. It's where she sits.
That's it.
So I hate to use the phrase like radiation or dirty or that because or disease, because ritual impurity is not wrong. It's not bad, right? Because, for example, a dead body, we have to take care of a dead body. We don't go, oh, I'm not going to touch it, right? We have to help take care of the person, and God gave us ways to take care of the ritual impurity after coming into contact. But those metaphors do sometimes help for thinking about how it spreads. It's like, imagine if I were to put white paint on my hand, right? And then I go and I shake your hand, right? Bam, she's definitely got white paint on her hand. But she's got probably a lot less than I did. But if she then puts her hand on the table, right, the question is, does the table become contaminated with the white paint or not? And if the table did become contaminated, and then I put a sandwich down on the table, would the sandwich also be contaminated? That's what we're talking about, the chain of transmission. Make sense? Okay. That's all you need to know for now. And if you want to study more, obviously there is a whole lot more halacha on this topic, but we're just going to be looking at a little bit of it for tonight. With that in mind, we're on chapter 2, and we are going to be talking about some of the ritual impurity for the sacrifices, which is always a major issue. All right, Mishnah 1.
Mishnah 1. Through all their days,
Rabbi Chanina.
Rabbi Chanina, chief of the priests, testified concerning 4 matters.
Okay, so that means that you can expect that we're going to have to say 4 different things that were taught in his name, right? So he's giving information about 4 different topics, and this is the first one.
Through all their days, the priests never refrained from burning meat which had been defiled by an offspring of impurity.
That's a lower level, right?
With meat which had been made impure by a father of impurity, although they were thereby increasing its impurity by a higher impurity.
Okay, so sometimes you have the meat of a sacrifice and something's gone wrong and it needs to be destroyed, or it's left over and it needs to be destroyed. Right. In this case, we're talking about meat that has clearly become ritually impure.
How would it become ritually impure?
Well, so different things could happen. Someone drops dead would be a major issue.
Where the meat is.
Right, exactly, where the sacrifice is taking place.
Yeah.
Something is used that is contaminated, that is ritually impure, that wasn't known to be ritually impure. And then after they say, oh, wait, you used that knife? Yeah. But that's the knife that that would also cause it to happen. Or some priest wasn't as careful in what they were supposed to be doing. And they say, well, wait, Bob, aren't you still, didn't you just go to your father's funeral last week, and it hasn't been long enough and you didn't do the red heifer yet. And he's like, oh my God, I can't believe I forgot. I mean, these are exaggerations, but there are ways that ritual impurity can happen. You have to be careful. And so here we have a question where you have two pieces of meat. Both of them are ritually impure, but one is ritually impure like level 1, and one is ritually impure like level 3 or level 4. And the question is, if I take the ritual meat that's only level 3 and I put it with the meat that's level 1, because I'm going to burn them both and destroy them, that level 3 goes up.
Yeah,
it becomes more impure.
Yeah,
Level 2.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I normally am not allowed, if like I have, let's say I do the sacrifice right and everything is perfect and I have the meat just right and I'm getting ready to get it, and I say, oh, but I've got a dead body over here. Let me just rub the meat on the dead body a little bit, right? No, you not only shouldn't you do that, but it is forbidden to make something ritually impure, right? When it's already holy. You're not allowed to make something ritually impure on purpose. Well, they're doing this on purpose. But the question is, if one thing is already ritually impure, but less, and something else is ritually impure and more, can I make the lesser more ritually impure, even though I'm just going to be destroying it? And the answer is yes. Yes, you can. Right? Even though we don't normally make something ritually impure or more ritually impure, because both of these are already impure and already going to be destroyed, we don't worry about it. So this is what you would call a leniency, that it's okay to just lump them together and burn them up. Right? Lumping them together and eating them isn't an option because both of them are already ritually impure. And of course, if one was ritually pure and one was ritually impure, then you definitely wouldn't be allowed to put them together. Right? Even if you were planning to destroy them, you wouldn't be allowed to put them together, because if one wasn't ritually impure, you're not allowed to deliberately make it ritually impure. Make sense? Okay. Should probably just say tameh and tahor, because ritually pure, ritually impure, it gets hard to say all that too many times. Feel my tongue getting heavy.
And Rabbi Akiva added, through all their days, the priests never shrank from lighting oil, which had been rendered unfit by a tevul yom, in a lamp made impure by one who was made impure by a corpse, although they were thereby increasing its impurity by a higher impurity.
Okay, so again, we have a case where you have something that is mega tameh, mega impure, and something that is minor tameh, minor impure. And the question is, can I burn the minor impure in the lamp that is major impure? And the answer is yes. Now, tevul yom, it's just an interesting little technical term. Oftentimes there would be cases where a priest would be ritually impure for a short period of time. He would then have to go to the mikveh, but he would remain officially impure until nightfall, right? Until nighttime, until the day was done. And so he's kind of pure because he's already gone to the mikveh, but he hasn't waited out the time. And so that is like a really, 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 really low level of ritual impurity, because he's not really impure because he went to the mikveh, but he hasn't finished the appropriate time, so he is technically impure. And so that's like most impure, least impure. It's okay, you can still mix and burn.
What is the meaning of tevul yom?
It's the person who is immersed for that day. Right. That's the name of that you give to a person who is immersed and waiting for the time to finish, the nighttime. Exactly.
But that's a priest, right? No.
Yes, it would be a priest. We don't ever do this stuff. I mean, technically, yes, there were cases where a person could, a regular person could, but it was mainly a priestly matter. Okay. Continuing with priests, as we expect, because Rabbi Hanina was a Kohen. He was a priest, so he knew a lot of these things, but he had something else to teach in Mishnah 2.
So Rabbi Hanina,
1 second. Oh, sorry. So what Rabbi Akiva said, it reinforced what Rabbi Hanina said before.
Yes, exactly.
It's an example for Rabbi Hanina teaching.
It's not precisely an example, it is a parallel ruling, right? Because it's not based on the same thing, because he doesn't want to make a general principle yet, but he's saying there's another activity that I've seen that shows the same idea behind it, right? It's the same principle-ish.
So he brings that edut.
Yeah, well, that's why we call it, exactly. Bringing testimony,
We are
exactly.
so used to seeing the rabbis argue with each other and present different points of view that this is unusual. That
To say, you know what that's similar to?
yeah, he's right. Yeah, he's right. Rabbi Hanina, chief of the priests, said, "All my days I never saw a hide taken out to the place of burning."
Okay. Little confusing.
Yeah.
I say that all the time, don't I? So when you slaughter an animal for a sacrifice, the usual types of things that can happen for an animal is you slaughter it, you take the skin off, you prepare it for the altar, and then it goes for the altar. Right? So
You don't take the blood before?
well, the blood was usually used for the altar. If you were going to be eating the animal, then yes, you had to also drain the blood. Right? But the question here is, what do we do about the skin?
Because normally the animal goes to for the sacrifice, but the skin.
Right. We don't throw the skin on the altar, and we don't
Right.
eat the skin. So what happens with the skin? So normally the skin would be owned by the person who brought the animal. Right. So let's say I'm bringing a shlamim, just a peace offering, and I take that offering and they slaughter my cow. Everything goes fine. I get the hide along with most of the meat, and I'm fine. I'm happy. Yay. But let's imagine I bring a cow, and the cow is like, broken leg, oozing out of its eye. It's got a mum. It's a blemished animal. So we're not allowed to sacrifice it. But I dedicated the animal, right? So I'm not allowed to just like say, oh, never mind. So the animal would just be destroyed completely, including its skin.
And can the priest eat the meat?
Not if it's blemished. Not if it's blemished.
So it's completely wasted.
It's gone. Right. But what happens if you have an animal and it looks fine, you take off the skin, and then you find that there's a blemish, right? Like inside the animal, and the animal won't go on the altar. But what happens to the skin? The animal can't go to the altar, but what happens to the skin? The skin was already removed before you discovered the blemish. Well, in general, you get to keep the skin, right? In particular, the priests would keep the skin. So what Rabbi Hanina is trying to say here is that they remove the hide, they get to keep the skin. So he's trying to say that's what normally would happen. No hide ever got thrown away, right? The hides from a blemished animal, when the blemish was discovered after the slaughter had taken place, those went to the priests. They weren't destroyed unnecessarily. The animals, if it was noticed before, the animal would be destroyed. And if there was no blemish, it went to the owner. But if you had this middle ground where the blemish was discovered late, we didn't throw away the hides. They were kept by the Kohanim.
Why not to the owner?
Because the sacrifice couldn't be completed. So it wasn't really their sacrifice anymore. I know, that's a perk.
So the priest can start to damage, to make some proper the middle process of take or the skin.
Trust, right? All the sacrifices, just like all of kashrut, is based on trust.
Right. Oh yes.
Stuff like this.
I mean, because they were doing it, or because of the suspicion?
They were doing it. Listen to the God.
It's leather.
No, it's my
You just use it for anything that is leather. Yeah. Okay. Now, Rabbi Akiva is going to also try to be finding a parallel, but this time they're going to push back on it.
Rabbi Akiva said, "From his words, we infer that whoever flays the hide of the firstborn beast, and it is found to be treif, the priests may enjoy the use of the hide. But the sages say, a testimony which consists of 'we didn't see' is not a proof. Rather, the hide must be taken out to the place of burning."
All right. So what he's trying to say is that you can't make this as a general rule. Instead, what the sages are saying, Rabbi Akiva is trying to make a general rule, which, as I said in our first Mishnah, is dangerous, right? Because if you only have a case, then you haven't actually proven the rule. And that's what Rabbi Akiva steps too far here. He says, so therefore, and the sages say, no. All that we know is they didn't, but that doesn't prove that it wouldn't happen, right? So actually the sages push back on this interpretation that Rabbi Akiva was making that I was trying to give you to start with. And they say it's not that they get this, it's that it never happened. They never had a blemished animal that would have caused them to destroy the hide. If they had, they still would have burnt it, right? So what the sages are trying to say is just because you never saw it happen doesn't mean you figured out the rule. It's like, imagine I never get my gas at Wawa, right? I've been watching Rabbi Neely for like a year, and he never gets his gas at Wawa. Therefore, it's forbidden for Jews to go to Wawa.
Right.
Like, no, you can't make that statement. Just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean you understand why you haven't seen it. And that's what the sages are trying to be careful here. And they're saying, Rabbi Hanina didn't say, this is the rule. He just said it never happened. And it never happened. There's lots of different reasons why it might not have happened. It might have been a rule, or it might have been it just never happened. You know, we never, like when we're talking about the red heifer now, that's needed for purification. You might think that don't like red heifers, but the truth is we just don't get them, right? They're incredibly rare, and we just have not had a red heifer that was eligible for being used for ritual purposes for as far back as anyone has found a record. Doesn't mean they don't exist. They're not unicorns, but they aren't there yet. And you can't make a rule out of their absence. You can't just say, therefore, You say, therefore, none have been born. That's all we can say. Right? So it's important before you draw a general conclusion to make sure that you're not just drawing it off a pattern that could have another explanation. Does that make sense? Okay. And that goes there, and we are on to 2-3. Still on Rabbi Hanina.
So Rabbi Hanina also testified concerning a small village in the vicinity of Jerusalem in which there was an old man who used to lend to all the people of the village and write out the bond in his own handwriting, and others signed it. And when the fact was brought before the sages, they pronounced it legal.
All right, so let me give you the modern example of this, because this might sound a little like, what's the problem here? So imagine you go to the grocery store and you want to buy $100 of groceries, and you're paying by check because, you know, you're not with a credit card. But in the old days, when people used to use checks all the time, and you give the checkbook to the cashier, and the cashier fills in all the information, right? The date, the amount, and all of that stuff, and then hands the checkbook back to you, and you sign and give them the check. Is that legal?
It is.
Yeah, you sign it.
Exactly. And that was the law in the Mishnah as well, which was, you might think that because the old guy is the one writing out, I owe Mr. Old Guy 100 shekels, that it's not right because he's writing what you are saying, but that's not really you writing it. You should have to write it, not him. I mean, he's the creditor. I mean, that seems like a conflict of interest and And they're saying, no, you sign it, that's legal.
It's the same today that any contract of real estate, someone write all the contract and give you, and in order to validate, you need to sign, but that's it. That's all we do.
Not just real estate, almost anything that a lawyer does for you.
Right.
You would have eliminated the whole practice of law if you said you couldn't do that.
Which wouldn't necessarily be so bad. But the fact is that, yes, we are used to signing pieces of paper someone else wrote, right? And that's normal for us nowadays. Back then, no. It was, I would write out, I owe Mr. Smith 500 shekels, and I promised to pay them by August 10th or whatever.
So that was for a problem of literacy or for what?
Well, I mean, why he was doing it, we don't know. Maybe it was just convenient, right? Maybe he was lending so much money to people in the village all the time, which, by the way, remember, was a good thing. He wasn't lending on interest. He was helping people who needed money to have enough money, right? So it wasn't like he was a loan shark. But you still want to make sure that he's not cheating people. But he maybe just had a stack of pre-made pieces of paper, and then, you know, let them each take it and make the signature.
Well, my father used to do this. He had a small bodega, and if people come, which he knew,
right?
Because
the locals,
the locals, like in the village, you know, he would give them whatever they need, milk, bread, whatever, and he signs it in a book,
Right,
and
it's
they
just
sign
correct.
it.
Yeah.
And that's it.
right.
And they sign
So,
it, exactly.
And they sign it, and
They do
then
not
they bring the money
they
later.
write out the amount.
Right.
In South America, it's very common. You go to a
Of course.
store, they know you in the neighborhood, you don't have money, don't worry how much is $15, they write there in a notebook $50, and at the end of the month, when
Right.
you receive the salary, you go and you pay the person.
Exactly.
That's it, it's a question of trust.
Which, by the way, would destroy the payday lending industry,
Yes.
which,
That's
quite
right.
frankly, deserves to be destroyed. It is usurious in every definition of the word. All right, part A of that.
Is, hence, incidentally, you may infer that a wife may write her own bill of divorcement, and a husband may write his own receipt. But the legality of a document depends only on those who sign it.
All right. So again, this what the Mishnah is saying here is that even if this was a get, right, that was going to be given to a woman to divorce her, if she could write it, because there's a lot of technicalities with the get, but imagine she has the skill and knowledge to write it. She writes out her own divorce, right? I am divorcing, and she writes her name, right? It's like a little weird to be writing it from his point of view about herself, and she writes it, and she says sign, right? And she signs it. Kosher, no problem. As long as he signs it, thank you. As long as he signs it, it's kosher. Or more to the point, as long as the witnesses sign that it was delivered, it's kosher. And vice versa. If he writes that he has paid her the receipt, the money, that she has received the money from the ketubah, for example, and she signs it that yes, she has received it, and that way he can keep the receipt to prove so no one ever asks him to pay double. It's also kosher as long as the right person is signing it.
I will talk if you cannot sign, because you don't know how to write.
There are always ways to sign.
I'm seeing someone else sign for you. Can you say after that, no, I didn't ask the person?
So it's not a question of getting other people to sign for you. What was also used for most of these things were witnesses, right? Is you would have other people present. I mean, like in a modern ketubah, the actual modern ketubah that we use, not the artistic part.
I mean for the store, not only for the tuba, for the gate, in general.
Okay. So if you have a store, right? We'll back up to that. But if you have a store like the bodega situation, and the owner of the store writes, Shlomo owes me $50, and then at the end of the month, Shlomo says, I don't owe you $50, right? That's not my signature. I didn't write that. Then you have a court case. Right, then you have to go to the dayan, to go to the judge, and that's where they're going to ask for witnesses and they're going to ask for proof. And then we get into all the details of, who has more credibility. But usually it's the person who's coming to demand is the one who has to provide more proof. So if you're going to expect me to pay you, you've got to prove it to the judge more than I have to prove that I don't have to pay you. In general. So that was how that would be settled. But generally speaking, like for a ketubah, we make sure there are additional witnesses who see that they are exchanging the ketubah. The ketubah is a promissory note, and those witnesses can be called on to give testimony of what they saw happen and when it happened and all of that. So that's how that works.
Rabbi, but in case the person signed
Mm-hmm.
and the other one don't read the paper, but sign like trust, like you say,
Right.
but don't give you the money
Mm-hmm.
and even unsign the paper, is kosher?
I'm trying to make sure. I want to make sure I
I
understand
lost
the
my
case.
money.
So
If like I
if
said,
you trust the other
someone-
person and the other person betrays you, and you have no proof and you have
I lost
no
my
witnesses, chances are you've lost your money. Yeah. So like if I loan you $5, right, and it's no one else is around, right? It's just right after class, everyone else has gone home, and I give you $5, and let's say we don't even sign a piece of paper, and then next week I say, oh man, I need $5 for gas, and you're like, what $5? Yeah, I'm out of luck, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no way for me to prove that you owe me $5, right? I've got no evidence at all, and that leaves me in a vulnerable position, which is why, as I think was already mentioned from the two different bodega things, that's why trust is so important,
Yes.
right? And why you don't give, like you said, like your dad only gave it to locals, right? He's not going to give it to people he's never seen before,
Yeah.
because you may never see them again. So trust works based on a stable relationship. You know, I know that you're good for $5 and you're good for and I'm good for $5 because we're going to see each other lots.
When you talk about the katuba and stuff, it's a big issue.
Of course, which is why we don't do it on, you know, a handshake, why we make sure we have documents, make sure we have witnesses, as much evidence as possible so that everyone knows that this is official and no one can be taken advantage of.
This is the essence of a community, real community.
Exactly, right? And that's, you know, as we've talked about in classes past, one of the things that we've lost a little bit in the modern world is that sense of, I know my grocer, right? I know the butcher. I know the guy who sold me my horse.
Yeah.
You know, it was like, you know, when I bought my first car, you know, I knew the guy I bought it from, and we were going to see each other. So I had a sense that when I bought the car, I knew who stood behind it. It wasn't just a car off some random lot. It
Buy
was,
here, pay here.
what's that?
Not the buy here, pay here.
Yeah, exactly. Not the we finance everybody kind of thing. Yeah, only 400%. So that made me feel better. And he knew when I bought the car that I wasn't going to disappear. He would have to still look me in the eye. And if there was a problem with the car that he hadn't already told me, and the car had problems, but he told me, then he would feel bad and I would feel bad and other people would feel bad about what we were feeling bad at, and that would be a problem. So it had a built-in fairness to it. It just doesn't happen like that much anymore.
Imagine how much more complex it got when people just put X's because they didn't know how to write or read.
And that's where witnesses were so
And
important.
that was
Yeah.
so complex.
Because then I can say, I saw you sign it, and it doesn't matter what's on the piece of paper.
Mhm.
And also, you can also remember back when we talked about Eduyot, about the testimony that people would give, why you have to have honest witnesses, right? Why we went into all that discussion of what happens when someone lies as a witness. Because if everything relies on witnesses, you've got to have right witnesses or else everything falls apart. All right, part 2, different topic.
But still Rabbi Hanania, chief of the priests.
And still in the same Mishnah, but it's part 2.
He testified concerning a needle which was found in the flesh of a sacrifice, that the knife and the hands which had been employed on the flesh are clean, but the flesh itself is defiled. And if the needle was found in the excrement, all are clean.
Okay, we'll get to that last line in a second because it's just a fun one. So in this case, we're talking about a needle, at least says the Talmud, that we know is ritually impure. The needle is tameh.
That's what makes
Right?
it
It's not that it's a needle, it's a ritually impure needle. And in fact, it's a ritually impure needle that has been in touch with an Av source, right? Like a body.
Ooh.
So it's real. But we know the needle has come into contact with the meat because we found it in the meat. So the meat is not allowed. The meat is ritually impure. But the knife, do we know if the knife touched the needle? We don't know that, right? If the knife like cuts through the needle and we see the needle like broken on each side of the slice, then sure, we do. But if there's just like a needle somewhere, we're like, well, wait, maybe the knife bumped against it. You know, how do we know? Well, because the slaughters take place in a public domain, Reshut HaRabim, which is the term for a public area, we rule leniently on these cases, says the Mishnah and the Halacha. And so therefore, the knife, we don't consider to be ritually impure. Make sense? Okay. However, if we find it in the excrement, right, in the droppings from the animal, everything is clean, right? The meat, the hands, and the knife. Why? Because maybe the needle didn't touch anything, right? Maybe it's just there. Maybe the excrement fell on top of the needle, right? Or maybe the needle went all the way through and never left and went straight through. And because, again, we rule leniently in this public setting, in the public domain, then it's considered ritually pure. Now, that doesn't mean excrement is clean when it comes to, like, you know, your laundry. It means it is ritually impure or ritually pure when it comes to ritual matters. And that's a great reminder that ritual purity has nothing to do with what you want to have, you know, like in your house. Because there are things that are ritually impure that are beautiful and clean and sanitary. And there are things that are ritually pure that are piles of excrement. Right? It's a different category altogether. Make sense? Okay. All right. Fold over, bring up so my eyes can focus. And we're going to move into our second section of this chapter, which is Rabbi Yishmael.
Rabbi Ishmael declared 3 things before the sages in the vineyard at Yavne.
All right. So first of all, just a little bit of history, only because it's so important. It's not actually important to the halacha, but it's very important to Jewish history. Yavne is one of the most important names that no one knows. So during the Great Revolt against Rome, the Great War in 70, that's the one that Josephus writes about in his book, and that's the war at the end of which the temple is destroyed. The zealots, the fanatics, take over Jerusalem. Those are the Jewish zealots and fanatics take over Jerusalem, and they are going to force everybody to fight to the death, and that is going to be the end of us all. And so Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, after a lot of drama, eventually sneaks out of the city pretending to be dead. They take him out in a coffin, and he goes to see the Roman general, and the Roman general is like, Jerusalem's done. There's no point trying to bargain for peace. And he's like, okay, don't give me Jerusalem then, give me Yavne. Give me Yavne and its sages. And he establishes an academy in Yavne. And all of the survivors, all of the scholarly survivors go there, and they try to capture all of the information of the oral law, all the information of how we do Judaism before it can be destroyed because of the war. And that is what preserves Judaism to be able to survive until after the war is over and we're able to go back to something like a normal life.
Where is Yavne in the northeast, southwest?
It is to the west and slightly south of Jerusalem.
Okay.
If I'm remembering my map correctly. It's not really an important place today. It was just important back then.
I heard a different story, that much more colorful about that he went.
Well,
there.
I cut a lot of.
No, yeah. And the general that was the Roman general, I think was Tito, I think was. That he said to him, you will be the Caesar.
Yes.
And they called him immediately.
Yep.
Like by coincidence,
Yep.
he became to be a Caesar, and he said, you know what? I will give you whatever you want.
Right.
And he asked for Yavne. He never asked for Jerusalem.
So there's a couple different versions of the story, yes, and lots of commentary about why he asked for what he asked, and the ultimate answer was that he knew Jerusalem was lost.
He wanted to start again.
Exactly, and the stories of what was happening in the siege of Jerusalem and what the zealots were doing and all of that is also very colorful. I was just trying to keep it a short story. No, but because you're right, it is absolutely amazing, and it's one of those moments where Judaism, the fire was just about ready to go out, and really Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai saved all of us. Right? It was, without him, who knows where we would be.
How come we don't hear so much about him? And he's the first time I hear it.
Because he's not as glamorous as others. And because even though he did this, his name doesn't come up for a lot of the halachot, right? Rabbi Akiva gets mentioned a lot.
Yeah.
Rabbi Yishmael gets mentioned. Hillel gets mentioned. Shammai gets mentioned. Him himself doesn't get mentioned so much, right? As one of the main sages. So yeah, it's a shame because he is one of our heroes. But you can visit his grave in Tiberias.
Merlot, I think, Merlot.
No, you're thinking of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Yeah, he's in Marlon. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is in Tiberias. Yeah, right next to Rambam's, Kever Rambam.
Maybe we can go there on June. Okay, that's another reason to go.
Yeah, except every time I've gone to little internal Israeli politics, every time I've gone to Kever Rambam, the tomb of Rambam, now, since when I went the first time, my heart has broken a little because they've created it as mechitza. They've tried to turn it into a synagogue. And Rambam in particular did not want a tomb. He explicitly said he didn't. And the idea of turning a tomb into a place of synagogue where you've actually divided it's such against what he taught.
It's also not a problem of Tamenta, or?
Of course.
Because the tomb is very impure.
Yeah.
And you have a synagogue there with all the Torah rolls and everything that's supposed to be much poorer.
Yeah. It's not right. It's not right at all. So when I went when I was, like 21, it was just the open tomb. And, again, Rambam didn't want a tomb, but it was nice and it was respectful and it talked about his halakha and all of that. And now that when I went like the second time, someone had just strung a rope and they'd hung a blue tarp right over the tomb, the sarcophagi, right? And it's just, come on, right? Jews have been able to go to cemeteries to pray if they wished as mixed couples their whole life. Why do you need a mechitza? Men, women on one different side. Look, let me just, if I'm going to pray, let me pray. I don't need to stand here or stand there. It's not like I'm having mincha here. I'm not having mariv here. This isn't my synagogue. Am I going to get a mechitza at the Grand Canyon because when I see this, I'm going to say a bracha because of seeing God's wonder? Anyway, that, like I said, it makes me angry.
One of the things that surprised me when I visited Poland was some of the cemeteries which still existed. The men were over here, buried here, and the women on another side. It's
Really?
Orthodox synagogue. Yeah, they were buried separately.
In the cemetery?
In the cemetery.
Wow.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, so talk about,
Yeah.
carrying that to an extreme. I mean, that's,
Even while dead.
even while
That's
dead,
very
they don't,
interesting.
yeah.
Hmm.
I thought that was,
I've never heard of, I've never been to Poland and
Right.
seen, I've never really been to any part of Eastern Europe
right,
to see the older cemeteries there. I'll have to look that up. That's really interesting.
yeah,
Wow.
it was. It was
All
very
right.
strange.
So
Okay.
Rabbi Ishmael is now in the vineyard at Yavne. That's like they had their academy at a place that was a vineyard. And that's, so it's the nickname for the school. And so they're together and he's giving some teachings.
Concerning an egg which was beaten together and placed on vegetables of teruma, that it acts as a connection. But if it was in the form of a helmet, it does not act as a connection.
Okay, I'm not going to pretend I'm enough of a chef to understand the difference that he's
Yeah.
describing here, but I can tell you what the halacha is,
Yeah.
right? So what he's trying to say is if you've got your vegetable, let's call it a zucchini, and you've got your egg on top of it. He's saying that if the egg is just like splattered all over it, then if the egg becomes impure, so does the vegetable, right? They are considered to be the same, right? And not this one causes this one. It is the same piece, right? So they become the same level, not one is one lower than the other. Make sense? Whereas if it is, and this is where my silly food drawing comes in, if it's a helmet egg, then it's considered separate, right? And now it's not the same that's contaminating each. It would be this one would then contaminate this one. There would be a degradation of the contact. So again, I'm not enough of a cook to know how often this is an issue, and I don't know how to make a helmet egg. The commentaries were a little unclear on that. None of them had pictures for me, and I don't know enough about eggs. I don't know whether they mean like over easy or what, but I kind of think that's what they're saying, which is that if one was scrambled, you can imagine it as like more blended onto the food, and if one was just sort of floating on top of it, then you can see it as being a separate food,
Or
right?
like
Almost like
something
a batter, would wrap over something.
Or if it was just like a pancake,
Right.
it would just sit on top.
Like a fried egg, just bonk,
Yes.
sitting on top. So that sounds like what he's talking about is one sounds more like almost a batter or a coating, and the other sounds like an egg that was just plopped on top. But I can't be sure because I'm not enough of a cook, and the commentaries, I'm afraid, didn't give me enough of a picture. But the principle is fairly clear, which is if something has become really connected, then it's like one piece of food, and it doesn't matter that it's made of two different foods. It's like one thing. But if they're still pretty separate, then they're separate, even if you stack them together, like a sandwich. If you have, the bottom piece of bread and the top piece of bread, and there's something in between them, if you touch the top piece of bread with ritual impurity, the bottom piece of bread will have a different level of impurity for that connection. Make sense?
Yeah.
Right? But if you have one of those little wooden sticks all the way through them.
So,
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm questioning, okay? If you are doing a sandwich, okay?
Yes.
And by mistake, someone put in some bread, ham, bread, and cheese,
Hmm.
okay? Another bread.
Right. Interesting sandwich.
Because the ham is not touching the cheese. There's not a direct level of impurity. Can you separate both and eat the cheese part?
Yes. Yes. Now, it gets more complicated than that. And if we ever get back to doing our Mishnah Torah discussion on kashrut, it's even more shocking than that, right? I mean, it's like if you have a cold piece of meat and you accidentally pour some milk over it, right? You just wash off the meat. You're fine. Which is like, what? Most people nowadays would take and just throw it out, but that's not actually the halacha, right? And there are other things as well that are allowing for nearness or even touching of things that shouldn't be touching, whether it be treif or whether it be meat and milk that are touching, and there are ways to recover from that.
So you can separate. If it's touching, including you can take out, separate, and continue eating.
It depends on how it was made, like if it's mixed up or whether it's just touching. It depends on the heat.
Yes.
It
cold,
right. It also depends on the sharpness, if it's harif, right? So like, for example, onions, right? The onion's considered to be like super penetrating and things like that. So there are a number of different vectors that have to be understood, which is why, generally speaking, when rabbis teach kashrut, they just say, don't let it touch. And if they do touch, throw it out. But really, there are more details necessary to make that decision. And like I said, hopefully we'll get back to Rambam someday, and we'll eventually get to that. And when you do, it's going to sound like a conservative rabbi. All right.
Okay.
Part two, different topic.
Yeah, part two. Concerning an ear of corn in the harvest.
By the way, corn, good old English word does not mean the yellow thing that we grow in America, right?
Oh.
Corn means grain, right? Just a general word for any grain, wheat, barley, oats, all of that. That's corn, right? The idea that corn is that yellow thing that you pull the husk off of and corn on the cob and all of that, that's a very modern usage of the word corn, right? That's not the old English word corn. Yeah. Like if you read the King James Bible, it'll say during Joseph's dream, which we just read about, that the ears of corn came out and ate each other. Right. And I remember when I first read that, I was like 18, 19 years old, and I'm like, but they didn't have corn back then. Oh. Corn's from America. And then I looked up in the dictionary, and no, they were not talking about the yellow stuff with kernels. They're talking about just any type of grain. Good. Good. So we're talking about grain here, not the American stuff.
It's kind of hard to read, but so concerning an ear of grain in the harvesting, the top of which reached the standing grain, that if it can be reaped together with the standing grain, it belongs to the owner. If not, it belongs to the poor.
Okay. So what we're talking about here, I'm going to need another little picture. Again, not drawn to scale, is right. We've got a standing grain of corn, right? Of grain. We've got a standing sheaf, stalk. Stalk's the right English word, right? Stalk of wheat. A stalk of grain. We got a stalk of grain. I do speak English, and we've got another one. And the question that we're talking about here is really a concept known as leket, of the forgotten grain, right? Because if you forget a piece of grain when you're harvesting, it belongs to the poor.
That's Ruth.
Ruth is the most famous story of this. And the question is, what counts as forgotten, right? If it is roughly the same height as the stuff that you're still harvesting, then it's not forgotten. On the other hand, if it's like this, or maybe it's now, bent over, but it's way down there. And so I've been out harvesting my field. There will be one more.
So it's more about the height and not about the distance between them?
Exactly, because I'm out harvesting, right? And I'm going row by row by row, and I've gotten to this row, right? That's the last one I've harvested. And then there is this row, and right here at in between, what counts, right? Because remember, the poor people are coming behind me. They're not waiting till like night. They're walking right behind me for what I drop. So if I harvest one, because it's all done by hand, remember, no machines, and I harvest it, and then I move on, and there's one that's really, really short, does that mean I'm going to come back for it when I come back around down the next row? Or does that mean I missed that one because it was so short I didn't see it? And if I didn't see it, then I've forgotten it, and now it belongs to that person. So what Rabbi Ishmael is saying here is that if it's short enough that you can't touch it, so it's not at least in that same range, then that's forgotten. You just missed it, right? Because it was so low, you just missed it. And if you just missed it and the poor person sees it, he can take it. But if it's tall enough, then he has to wait for you to do your lap and come back, and maybe you'll get it on the next lap. And then after you've cleared out completely, if you miss it, then it's his definitely, right? So it's if it's standing there all by itself and you're like half a mile away, you forgot it, he can take it. But if it's next to one, but super low, and you've already gone past or you've been through that area, then you probably did miss it, and now it's his. Right? And this is life or death for people who were poor. And life or death for the farmer as well, remember? Because farmers were not like always rich. Farmers were just people who happened to have land, and the poor were people who were farmers who didn't have land. And so we need to make sure that this is done fairly, that we both live up to the Torah as well as make sure people can live. All right, totally different topic. Number 3.
Concerning a small garden which was surrounded by a row of vines.
All right, here's the question. Oh, sorry, here's the issue. You are not allowed to grow things inside of a vineyard other than the grapes, right? This is you can't mix the species that you're growing in one area, right? So let's imagine I've got, these are my grapes, right? That's why it's blue. They're grapes, right? I cannot grow my watermelon. Right, I can't do.
Not mixing seeds.
It's part of the not mixing of the species, and so that is forbidden. Definitely, that has to be kept clear. However, what if? Oh, wrong color. What if I've got my vineyard, and I've got all of those like that, but my vineyard looks like this? What do I do with this area? Is this area in the middle the vineyard, or is that area in the middle not the vineyard? Well, okay, how do you know? So let's imagine, hold on, I didn't draw this to scale, right? Let's imagine this is 1 mile, right? So there's a 1 mile row of grapes, 1 mile row of grapes, 1 mile row of grapes, 1 mile row of grapes. There's a mile empty patch in the middle. They go around the edge of my field. Can I use my field in the middle, or is my field now a vineyard just because there are vines around it?
Because I think yes, because the bees can go and bring from one to the other. Not really. I remember when I lived in a kibbutz, we did cotton, and we need to be very careful where to don't put different kind of cotton very close, because the bees can bring from one side to the other side and become to be tameh.
Well, they can become cross-pollinated. Yeah, but that's 2 types of cotton, right? If I'm growing watermelon, the bees are not going to make watermelon grapes.
Right.
No, but
because they go everywhere anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't have to like, every time a bee flies into my field, I don't have to like take it through passport control and check it to make sure that it's clean.
In my opinion, I think you can grow something on
in that giant empty spot. All right. So what if I change it? And now it's 10 feet, like these tables.
No.
Right. And now there's an empty spot in the middle, but we have vine, empty between the vines. Now is it okay?
No.
All right. So between 10 feet and 1 mile, where does the magic happen? Right? Where does it change from being too small to being big enough?
Distance.
How much?
It says here.
Okay, please read Rabbi Ishmael.
Concerning a small garden which is surrounded by a row of vines, if it has space for the grape gatherer and his basket on one side, and space for the grape gatherer and his basket on the other side, it may be sown with seed. But if not, it may not be sown with seed.
All right, so what's the answer? The answer is if Shlomo the gatherer and his basket can fit on both sides,
Okay.
it's okay, right? If it's big enough for a person to actually do the work of harvesting without also being in the vegetables, then it's a separate garden, right? Yes, geographically it is surrounded by the vineyard, but it's not connected thematically. It doesn't have the same identity because there's enough room to move between that it's separate. That's over there, this is over here, and yes, they're close, but me and my basket, we're talking like 6 foot or something. That's plenty of room to say that that's the vineyard and that's my vegetables. Make sense?
Yep.
I know. It's so nice when it's so reasonable. We're on 2.5, right? Oh yeah, we can do 2.5. 2.5 is fairly straightforward.
They stated
Kinda.
3 things. They stated 3 things before Rabbi Ishmael, and he pronounced none of them either unlawful or lawful.
Which, by the way, means he didn't know. So basically, there are 3 topics, and Rabbi Ishmael goes, I don't know. I don't know what we do on that. However,
And Rabbi Yoshua ben Mattia explained them.
but we get an answer nonetheless. So again, it's so nice, like we saw in chapter 1, that the sages didn't know everything. They knew an awful lot, close to everything, but they didn't know everything. And when they didn't know, they said, I don't know. And then other people would help provide more answers. So what are these 3 things?
So the first thing is one who lances an abscess on the Sabbath.
Okay, let's make sure everyone understands what this is, right? You've got some horrible boil on your arm, right? That big bump and nasty, people, it was horrible to live back then. So you've got this, and you've got a big pin, right? A big metal needle, and you need to pop it. Is that okay on Shabbat or not? That's the question.
If it's just to make an opening, it's not okay.
Right? If you're digging the needle in, so nasty, just to make an opening so that it will just have an opening, right? It will drain a little bit and dry out a little bit, but this is not going away, right? This is a permanent growth on your arm, and you're stuck with it forever, and you're just trying to make it a little better, and you're doing it on Shabbat. No.
But what coffee not allow you to enjoy the Shabbat because it gives you relief and allow you to enjoy the Shabbat.
All right, so hold on. So here's part 2.
Here's part 2. If it was to bring out the pus, then it's okay.
Right? If it's actually throbbing and there's pressure and you need to pop it to let the pus out and it will get better, then yes, that's okay, right? Even on Shabbat. So the question is not, can you make a hole? The question is, what do you think you're doing when you make the hole? If you're trying to relieve the pressure, to allow it to drain, to heal the thing, then yes, you're allowed to do that. On the other hand, if you're just doing a little bit of repair work to your nasty, nasty skin condition, which is going to be with you probably for your rest of your life, save that for Yom Rishon, save it for Sunday. And don't do the fiddling. It's just like trimming your fingernails, right? If your fingernail was like bleeding and full of pus and you needed to remove, the part of it to keep yourself from, suffering, then yes, you're allowed to do that. But if you're just trimming them to put them in better maintenance, you don't do that on Shabbat.
Right. I remember I was in shul about 10 years ago when it was Shabbos and somebody passed out on the floor.
Yeah.
And one of the people said, call 911 and start CPR. And they all says, no, you're not allowed to do this. This is Shabbat. No. Yeah. We're allowed to do all of that to save a life. So
yeah, Shulchan Aruch calls that person a pious idiot.
That's
That's literally
right.
what Shulchan Aruch calls someone who does that. He says, wait, am I allowed to save this person?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just laying there on the floor and he's trying to have a discussion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Crazy.
All right. Number 2.
Concerning someone who hunts a snake on the Sabbath.
Okay. You probably never thought of this as for your Shabbat activity.
No.
You're hunting a snake.
If he was occupied with it in order that it should not bite him, then he's innocent.
Right? So if there's a snake in my yard and I'm going, get it. Okay, no problem. You're still good for Shabbat, right? It's unfortunate, but that you're not doing it for any other reason other than to save your life, to keep it from biting you. However,
But if he might use the snake as a remedy, like snake oil, then he's guilty.
if he's saying, get it, because I want to use the fangs, I want to use the venom, or snake bones are good for something, whatever they thought that you could use a snake for, then now you're actually hunting constructively rather than just destroying the thing. And as we know, construction not allowed on Shabbat. Most forms of non-constructive deconstruction are allowed, right? That's why, for example, you're allowed to open a bag of potato chips on Shabbat, right? Because you are ruining the bag, even though you're getting to the chips. So that's what is an example. And part 3.
Concerning Iranian stew pots, which are clay pots.
Okay, well, they're more than clay pots. And this is something that I needed my commentators for, because who here has an Iranian pot? So apparently what they would do was they would make round clay balls that were hollow. And then when they were done, they would crack the ball and you have your 2 pots. Right? So this was a way to make 2 pots at the same time. I don't know why they did it. I'm not a potter, but apparently this was a thing. So you have to imagine a round ball, hollow in the middle, and you're going to break it. And when you break it, you're going to end up with 2 pots. Good? Good. Got to have that in mind.
They do not contract impurity when they're under the same tent as a corpse.
So remember we talked before about earthenware vessels that were tightly sealed that are under in the ohel, under the tent, right? That if it's tightly sealed, then it doesn't contract the ritual impurity. And so what he's saying here is that because it's all the way around, it doesn't, it's closed because it's a hollow ball, then it doesn't contract impurity. Make sense so far?
Even if it's been cut in half.
No, it hasn't been cut yet.
This is when it has not been cut.
Right.
Okay, we understand. But they do become impure if they're carried by a zav.
Right. So the opinion, and this is again Rabbi Joshua ben Mattia, was that a zav, that's a man or a woman who has had a unscheduled discharge. Right. They are leaking from their generative organs in a manner that is not the way they normally function. If that's happening, that's a different level of impurity, and he believed that would cause the pot to then become ritually impure. The same way,
touches it.
right? The same way that if I was carrying a pot, any kind of pot, it would become ritually impure. So he's saying just normal rules apply to these pots in these other circumstances. However, Rabbi Eliezer ben
says, even if they are carried by a zav, they remain pure because they're unfinished.
So we've touched on this from time to time, that for things to become able to be made ritually impure, they have to be a man-made item, right? Until they're a man-made item, they can't become ritually impure. His opinion is that these balls aren't done yet, right? Because they're not pots until you break it open. And at the moment, it's just a hollow clay ball. And that's not good for anything. So therefore, even if somebody is ritually impure, is touching it, it doesn't become ritually impure because it's still in the status of being a natural material. It hasn't become a usable object yet. Make sense? Okay. And that's where we're going to leave it for tonight. I think we've hit enough random topics.
Oh, yeah.
Farming, to sacrifices, to Shabbat, and plenty of ritual impurity.
And food.
Always food. It's Jewish.
Wow.
All right. Oh, I forgot to hit stop.
Oh.